Hey guys, what's up? Today I want to talk about rule sets in speedrunning. Because this is like kind of a hot topic at times. You know, we recently we had this whole situation with the Super Mario 64 leaderboards kind of tightening down their rules a little bit, and it caused quite a bit of a stir on Twitter. So I figured I would put some thoughts out there about rule sets. So let's get right into it, and I'm gonna start off with kind of a primer on rule sets. So what do rule sets really mean within the context of speedrunning? So rule sets are purely there for the competitive aspect of speedrunning, because if you don't have to care about, you know, competing with anyone else, then who the fuck cares about runs? Because that point, or who the fuck cares about rules? Because at that point you're just going to be comparing to yourself if you're not, you know, doing any competition with anyone else. So like, it doesn't matter what rules or whatever, how you play, if you're just comparing to yourself. So for speedrunning, the rules are purely there to facilitate fair competition. So in my opinion, rules should only be put in place if they are actually conducive to competition. Now, what I mean by that is that it doesn't really make any sense to add a rule that doesn't in some way either ensure that competition is fair or kind of enhance the focus of the run. It can be kind of hard to think of examples for that. I guess the best way to kind of to exemplify that is that there are rules that are basically only there in order to create new categories. So to draw a little bit from my own experiences with speedrunning, Luigi's Mansion is a good example of that, where the any percent no out of bounds category is the most popular category, and that category adds a rule that you're not allowed to go out of bounds. And the reason that that is a good thing, like that is a good category and that rule makes sense, is because it completely changes the game compared to just regular any percent. So it turns it into an entirely different run, which requires entirely different skill sets. So that rule is conducive to competition, in my opinion, because it basically creates this entire new thing that requires a specific skill set that's completely different from regular any percent. So that's like the basics about speedrunning rules, in my opinion. So where does the controversy kind of come into play? Well, basically rules can also make it harder to speedrun. I mentioned the Super Mario 64 controversy that was recently, you know, kind of a thing. So what they did there is they introduced two new rules. The first rule is the one that got the most, like, that got a rise out of everyone, was that they introduced time cutoffs, and if you are faster than those times, then you are not allowed to submit with a non-capture card video as proof. So, you know, I think you can kind of see that that's like, or why that kind of got a reaction out of people, because it's like, oh, but, you know, you're potentially not allowing people to compete even though they have completely valid proof. Because let's face it, a webcam recording or a camera recording of gameplay is no less legit than a capture card recording. So, you know, that kind of stuff, that's controversial. And then the second rule they added was in my, like, okay, real quick, the second rule that they added is actually going to affect a lot more people, although maybe not in a very significant way. But the second rule that they added is that you are not allowed to use the reset button to restart the game, since timing starts on console power on in Super Mario 64. So yeah, they added the rule that you have to use the power button. That way you can't, like, have a Game Shark plugged into the N64 and have it, like, not show up, because it always shows up if you power on the console, and it doesn't when you reset. But yeah, anyway, so that's like an example of some controversial rules. And now there are pros and cons to this kind of thing, but I think that ultimately what a lot of people tend to kind of lose track of is the fact that speedrunning is a very unique hobby, in that it is extremely easy to get into, right? If you own a video game, you can speedrun. And that is amazing. And that is one of the single biggest strengths of speedrunning, in my opinion, is that it's super accessible. There are millions of people who have played video games or who do play video games regularly, and every single one of those people has everything that they need in order to do a speedrun. And that's great, you know? So these rule sets, what they kind of do sometimes in some situations is that they create barriers that don't really need to be there. So when you're forcing people to get a capture card, and let me first say that I don't think that the rule change for Super Mario 64 is a bad one, because it only affects people who are in the, like, higher ranges of competition. They have those time cutoffs, which is something very similar to what we do on the Super Mario Sunshine leaderboards. We being the moderation team, we have time cutoffs under which video proof is required. So, you know, our leaderboards are a little bit more lenient, and that has a lot to do with our philosophy as a moderation team. So I don't think that that's a bad change necessarily. But yeah, okay, so some games have more strict rules. I think SM64, for example, like, they pretty much, nowadays they require video on every submission, which, you know, kind of adds to the fact that, like, this whole thing was so controversial. But let's kind of move away from SM64. I don't want this video to be mainly about that. But yeah, that's like an example. So it creates barriers for entry, and the counterpoint to that, in my opinion, is also something that I think a lot of people, they kind of lose sight of, is that speedrunning doesn't necessarily have to be about the competition. You can speedrun a game and you can have plenty of fun, you know? And in my opinion, fun is the essence of speedrunning. Like, we all wouldn't be speedrunning if it wasn't in some way enjoyable. You know, like, competition is nice, but it's not like speedrunning is like this multi-million-dollar business, like, you know, esports, like MOBAs and FPSs and stuff, or anything like that. So, you know, in the end, we're all speedrunning for fun and personal enjoyment. And there are some people that combine speedrunning very successfully with their streaming careers, and they are able to make a living speedrunning. But that's like the exception. Like, there are very few people there. So I think that at large, the speedrunning community is speedrunning for fun. So, you know, it's not the worst thing in the world if you cannot submit your run to a leaderboard, because there's definitely some precedent for people to, or like for leaderboards to have certain standards about what counts as a valid submission and what doesn't. Personally, I think that it's best to maximize your accessibility in terms of these requirements, such as video proof. So what we do for the Super Mario Sunshine leaderboards is that we basically evaluate everything on a case-by-case basis. Our leaderboards have kind of gotten some criticism saying that, like, oh, blah, 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 you don't even need video. You can just submit a fake run. But yes, that is true. That can happen. There are probably fake runs on our leaderboards, and there's not a fucking thing we can do about it. But the thing about that is that it doesn't really matter. We have time cutoffs, and below those time cutoffs, video is required. So in order to get away with not submitting a video with your run, you're not submitting a very good time. So the kind of degree of competition there is pretty low, and the people who are, you know, playing at that level probably don't care that much about the competition. I mean, they obviously care some amount because they are on the leaderboards, but I think that for most people, competition is way more about the people that they know. Like, we all know, like, if you're a speedrunner, you definitely know that having a rival is the greatest thing ever. Like, just bopping each other back and forth, beating each other's times, like, that's where the real fun is in the competition, I think, or at least the majority of it. And then, you know, the second part where competition becomes really, you know, a drive is when you kind of get the feeling that, oh shit, I could maybe go for a world record in this category. Like, that's when it also becomes like real, or, you know, like in some popular games, maybe like, oh, I can get top 10 or top 5. But yeah, I think that that's where most of the fun and competition enters the picture. And fun is a whole other thing that I think that a lot of communities really need to consider more when they create their rule sets. So, quick example, A Hat in Time. Recently a strat was found in that game that, or I don't know the details, all right? So Hat in Time runners, don't get mad at me, but basically there was some like some stuff going on in A Hat in Time where you could exit into the menu or out of the game completely or something, and that would make the run faster on the in-game timer, but not in real time. So, you know, as you can imagine, that's not the most fun thing in the world. You're basically taking a longer duration of time to complete a run in order to get like a better time on the in-game timer, which was being used. It kind of goes against the philosophy of speedrunning, in my opinion. I mean, you're interrupting the game on purpose in order to inflate this number, and it doesn't really, like, allowing that kind of thing, in my opinion, is a good thing if it's like something that adds to the run, if it makes the run more interesting from an execution standpoint. So like, in-game time can be really good for some games where there are actually interesting ways to optimize the in-game time as opposed to real time. But if it's just a matter of, oh, after I complete the level, I exit the game instead of just waiting for whatever cutscenes to play. I don't know about the Hat in Time thing exactly, but yeah. That's not fun. So, like, in my opinion, the solution there, and I think they ended up banning that strat. I'm not sure, but that is, in my opinion, the correct thing to do. That strat detracts from the run. It doesn't improve competition. Get it out of there. You know, like, fun is more important, in my opinion. And our leaderboards, Super Mario Sunshine, they're kind of controversial. Or they have been within its own community. It's been kind of controversial for a long time, actually. So back in 2014, end of 2014, when we were switching over to speedrun.com, it used to be that the leaderboards were on a spreadsheet and they were just submitted through a Google form, and then the moderators would add them manually. And back then we allowed 2 timing methods. So for Super Mario Sunshine, there was the reset timing, which is basically the same thing that they do in Super Mario 64. So you start the game on console power on, basically. That's when you start the timer. And there was file select timing, which is something that kind of the newer runners started doing because they just felt that it made more sense. And it was only a small difference. It was a 7-second difference. But, you know, when we moved to Speedrun.com, we figured, or, well, I wasn't a part of the moderation team back then. So the moderation team then, I think specifically Nkiller, who owned the original leaderboards, he wanted to have a single timing method. And that was a fucking shit show. It took so long. Everyone was fighting over it. There was this huge issue with the lack of communication with the Japanese community because they were mainly the people who were using reset timing. Like most of the Western community was using file select timing. But anyway, that's details. It took a long ass time and there was a lot of drama. And some people, including myself, said some things that they shouldn't have. This all happened in private mostly, luckily, so it wasn't too big of a, it wasn't like the modern day Twitter drama that we get now in the speedrunning community, good god. But yeah, so that was a thing. That was one thing. And now, like, over the past year, there's been a lot of buzzing around potentially skipping the intro in Super Mario Sunshine. So Super Mario Sunshine, the game starts off with about 6 minutes of cutscenes at the start, but there's also a little bit of gameplay in between those 6 minutes of cutscenes. So the current rule set entails that you just start the timer on file select and you have to sit through all these cutscenes because cutscenes are not skippable in Super Mario Sunshine, with the exception of a few that you can skip through glitches. Yeah, that's how it's always been. Now, there has long been discussion about either finding ways to skip the cutscene, which has never happened thus far, or just starting the timer after the cutscenes, because let's face it, it's not a lot of fun to have to sit through 6 minutes of cutscenes at the start of every one. And since the amount of gameplay in between those cutscenes is relatively small, you don't lose out on a lot. Now, I personally, I am a proponent of this. It's called race timing. That's what people call it. I don't really know the history behind that. I think it stems from the 20 Shines category, which is a racing category, and that actually starts after the cutscene. So I think that's where the name came from, but it's like goes way back. So I don't know the details. It's kind of a weird name. That's why I thought I would elaborate on that. But anyway, race timing, race file timing. So yeah, I am a big proponent of this, and I have done, or I've tried very hard to kind of bring people over to my side. All right, so I will outline the main arguments in favor and against race file timing. All right, so the people who are against race file, they argue that it's not okay to skip a part of the game. And they also argue that since you're not playing everything in the game, that it's like either it's not a real speedrun of the game, or that you know, you lose out on some sort of a skill component. I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, and then there's another argument that's saying like, oh well, if you do that, then you're basically forcing people to have a memory card, which, in my opinion, that's a very silly argument. But those are honestly like the main arguments against it, is just like, you know, purism. Like, we want to speedrun the entire game. There might be some other minor arguments. Do let me know in the comments. I can't think of them right now, but That's the main stuff. Okay, so then the arguments in favor are that you're cutting out 6 minutes of downtime, which means that it makes the speedrun more focused. You don't waste any time sitting around doing nothing. That's what I mean by that. Like, it's just more gameplay, higher gameplay ratio. It makes the speedrun more efficient because you can do more attempts. Like, any high-level runner of Super Mario Sunshine has lost a lot of time to watching those cutscenes. So, like, it allows you to make more efficient use of your time. And the third thing is that it makes it more fun, because you're not being forced to sit around. And oh yeah, this is a good one. So actually, to go back to the counter arguments, is that some people are like, they say like some dumb stuff like, oh, but I actually like having the forced break. But okay, that is a big fallacy, because you can still take breaks in between your runs if you want. There is literally nothing stopping you from doing that. So yeah, I always thought that was a very silly argument. But yeah, like, it makes the run more fun. And then there's also kind of a subset to that, is that there are quite a number of people who have voiced their opinions that if Super Mario Sunshine did not have such a long cutscene at the start, then they would want to run it. But since that cutscene is there, they don't want to do it, because they just don't find that fun. Like, they would rather play a game that takes them right into the action. So there is a real precedent there that is basically literally people saying like, oh, I don't play that because of the cutscene. So to me, it's like pretty clear cut that, okay, the cutscene definitely is not good for the fun of the speedrun. Now, then there's the other side of that, which, you know, the two sides of rule sets, right? Competition and fun. We've covered fun. Competition. There is about, I would say 20. I timed it at one point. I don't remember the exact number, but I think there's about 20 seconds of actual gameplay in the intro in Super Mario Sunshine. And about 12 of those seconds are literally spent just standing still and spraying water in a very boring way, in a way that's impossible to mess up. So there's about 8 seconds of skill-dependent gameplay by that math. I don't remember the exact number, like I said, but it's a ridiculously tiny amount in that part of the run. So to me, there is no real argument to be made there, in my opinion, that those 8 seconds of meaningful gameplay add enough value to the run. Spoilers, they don't, because really the airstrip isn't very interesting execution-wise. You just can't convince me of that. The benefits of the increase in fun and accessibility of the speedrun are so much greater than the small amount of skill required to play those 8 seconds. Like, that's lost. Like, that's nothing. Like, it makes the speedrun overall better if you cut out the intro in Super Mario Sunshine. That's my take on it. I hope I did a good job fully explaining my opinion on this, because it's something that I'm pretty passionate about, and that's kind of why this video has ended up being pretty long. So yeah, a recap, I guess. Rule sets should be conducive to competition and to fun, and I think that, you know, people get very bogged down by having fair competition. Like, they're very focused on having fair competition, which is great. You know, it's good that people want speedrunning to be fair, but I think that people focus a bit too much on the competition aspect of it, and they don't focus enough on the fun and accessibility. And if you are a moderator of any leaderboard on speedrun.com, then I would encourage you to take a good look at your rule sets and just kind of be critical of them. Maybe ask your community what they think, like if the rule sets could be improved. See if you can make your game more fun and more inviting and just overall better. I've been fighting the fight for a long time in the Sunshine community now. Unfortunately, it's still not over. We're still we're still watching cutscenes. So yeah, it can be tough, but I think that it's definitely something that's worth doing, looking towards the future. And you know, if we as a collective community, and I know there's like a lot of people like, oh, there is no real overarching speedrunning community, I'll make another video about that. But if we as a community want speedrunning to grow, then this is the sort of thing that we really need to think about more. You know, like the sensibilities of the average speedrunner do not necessarily align with the sensibilities of people who are looking to get into speedrunning, and they're not necessarily objectively the best either. There is definitely some room for discussion there, and I think that we need to discuss this more. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to say. I'm gonna end this up before it becomes half an hour long. We're already well underway. So please let me know what you think, guys. This is a topic that I really care a lot about. So let me know in the comments, on Twitter, on Discord, heck, anywhere. Just shoot me a message, please. And yeah, with that, I'm gonna wish you a good day, and I will see you when I see you.